Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Eastin. I'm the president of Smoky Mountain Storytellers Association. To any of you who are online, we're glad to have you with us today. And we're going to do some storytelling. And then afterward, there's going to be a meeting for the group if anybody would like to stay. We are always glad to have new members, and we're always glad to have you participate. Anyway, we're going to have three storytellers today. And I'm going to start off with a story that is not mine, and I'll introduce you to the author at the end. Peter Roberts owned a curio shop, which is not a store you go to when you want to buy something. It's a store you go to when you want to buy anything, because you never know what's going to be there. There might be an entire set of dinnerware with the letter H on it. There might be dueling pistols. There might be cameos. There might be anything. And that's the reason people love to go there. And so Peter was used to people coming in to browse, coming in to bargain, coming in to buy. And he was used to people going by the window looking in. And 11 days before Christmas, he saw a little face pressed against the window and two little hands keeping the glare out of her eyes. And she had wheat colored hair and big sea green eyes. And she was obviously very interested in something. And as he watched her, she stood up, straightened her shoulders, and marched in the door and walked up and said, "Excuse me, sir, can you show me the blue beads in the window?" And he said, "I'd be very happy to." So he walked over to the window and he took out the little bust that had the topaz necklace with several topaz on the necklace. And he set it on the counter in front of the little girl. And she looked at it like a jeweler. She checked every little facet, wanted to see how it looked as the light reflected on it, got up close to it, looked at every one. Finally, she made a decision and she said, "It's perfect. I want to buy this for my sister, and I'm going to give it to her on Christmas Eve." And he said, "Well, that's wonderful. Did your mom or your dad come with you today?" And she said, "No, my mom died, so it's just my sister and me." And he said, "Oh, I'm very sorry. Did you bring any money?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I've got money." And she reached into her coat pocket and she pulled out a handkerchief that had two knots in it and a big bulge in the middle. And she opened up one knot and poured everything out onto the counter. And she said, "Yeah, I got it in my bank, and that's all I've got. Is that enough?" And from the front side, she could see the necklace. But from the back side, he could see the price tag. And there was no way these two numbers were going to go together. She had a lot of pennies and a couple of nickels, a couple of dimes, and one quarter. And now Peter was not sure exactly how to proceed. So he thought just a moment and he said, "Give me just a minute." And he took the little bus and he turned around and he walked back in through the doorway to a work area. And she could see his back as he was kind of bent over the table, busy with something. And he called back over his shoulder and said, "What's your name?" And she said, "Jean Grace." And he said, "Well, that's a very pretty name." She said, "What's your name?" He said, "Peter." She said, "That's a very pretty name." And she could see his shoulders kind of go up and down a little bit. It took him just a few more moments, and he turned around and he brought back to her a little package made of folded red foil with a green ribbon on top. And he said to her, "Now I want you to be very careful with this while you go home. Don't lose it." And she said, "Oh, I won't." And she said, "Thank you," and took the package and went through the door. And as she closed it, the little bells jingled. And he was smiling as he watched her walk down the street. And then as she faded, so did the smile. And he began to kind of go back into the same melancholy mood that he normally had. He had been engaged 5 years earlier when he was 25 to a young woman, and a car wreck took her and it took all of his dreams. And so now he was 30 and prematurely gray, and all of his days were just get up, go to the shop, make sure everything's good, deal with the customers, stay late, go home, eat and sleep and start again. Because there was no reason to go home. He just stayed later and later at the shop every day, and it had been that way every day. Well, the next 10 days were busy. People trying to get last minute things for Christmas, and they're perfect for a curio shop because if you already know what to get, you know where to get it. But if you don't know what to get, a shop like his is perfect because you might walk in and you might find a trumpet, or you might find a sword, or you might just any crazy thing might be the perfect thing. So people were coming in and out and they were shopping and looking, and some were buying and some were bargaining, and some were just trying to see how low they could get him to go, but they had no intention of buying. And it was just that way, day after day after day after day. And he was so busy that finally he was grateful when Christmas Eve came because nobody came in the shop that day. Christmas Eve is the day men wait for before they stop shopping, or before they start shopping, and they don't go to curio shops. They usually end up with flowers and candy from the drugstore, because if you wait until Christmas Eve, that's pretty much all that's going to be left over. So he wasn't very busy that day. He had plenty of time to make sure everything was cleaned up and ready for the day. He had some packages that people were going to pick up later, but all of that was for after. And he was kind of thinking about how late he would stay in the shop because Christmas Eve is not really a night you want to go home if you have nothing to look forward to. But anyway, he was about to close the shop for the evening, and a woman came in breathless, and she walked right up to the counter and she said, "Did this come from here?" And he looked at her hand, and it was a red foil box that had been opened, and the blue topaz necklace and the ribbon were inside. And he looked at it and he said, "Yes, that came from here." And she said, "Oh my God, listen, my sister is a good girl, and I'm sure it's just been there's just been so much on our in our lives this year, and I'm sure she didn't mean to do it. And if you can forgive her, I promise it will never happen again." And he looked at it and he said, "Jean Grace did not steal this necklace. She bought it." And the young woman was just dumbfounded. She said, "Bought it? How much was it?" And he paused just a moment, and then he said, "Well, the price between a buyer and a seller is confidential." And she said, "But she didn't have any money." And he said, "Yeah, she had money. And I'll tell you, she paid the highest possible price. She paid all she had because she loves her sister." And so this woman just stood with her eyes just full of tears, and her wheat blonde hair, her sea green eyes. And he began to fold the little box back together and put the bow on it. And he said, "I was just about to close up the shop. And with your permission, I would like to walk you home so I can watch your little sister give you this present again." And she took the package, and now the tears were falling. And she said, "Why would you do such a thing?" And he said, "Because it's been several years since I've had somebody to give a present to. And I think it's time I learned how to do it again." And he came around the counter, and the two of them walked to the door, and he turned out the light, turned the open sign around to close, and locked the door. And the two of them walked out into the night. And that is from a story called A String of Blue Beads by Fulton Forster. Very good. Hi. Come on in.
Kathleen, would you like to go next? Sure. We're gonna let Kathleen tell this one, really. Really.
But wait,
Wait
I'm
just a minute till
sorry,
she
you
swings
are?
around. So she won't run.
Cars.
Um, Okay. Turn this down a little bit.
everybody here and everybody on the computer screen. And I have, we have our up here somewhere. Oh yeah, it's got nothing. Let's see if we get. Okay. Yeah, I think I have enough time to. If I leave you 20 minutes, is that enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to do two sort of 10-minute stories. The first is called A Christmas Visit. Both of these stories, as well, this one is from Scotland. And I don't do a blog very well, so I try to get the rhythm right, but this the sound doesn't always match.
Jane, you may need to do something. I was gonna get Brenda to close the door if she was here.
Oh, they just slide. That's right. Yeah. There was an old man. We lived all by himself in a wee stone house, high up on a mountain top in Scotland, way up in the rocky Burren, where well above the tree line. And he was a widower. He learned to manage quite well for himself. He did all his own cooking and housekeeping, and in truth, he was happy. Contented living up there alone. He'd had a good life and many good memories. Many happy memories to look back on and nothing to complain of. So when the Christmas season came around and his granddaughter went up to see him on Christmas Eve, and she said, "Grandfather, why don't you come down to the village and join us for Christmas? We don't see nearly enough of you. And besides, there's a big storm coming, and Mother is worried that you'll be up here all by yourself." Bessie, it's awfully kind of you. You just go back and tell your mother that I'm content up here where I am, and she mustn't worry about me not at all. I have what I need, and to tell you the truth, in the long nights of this winter, sometimes the veil between this world and the next is so thin that I feel the presence of Bridget. That was his departed wife. I feel her right here beside me in the room. So you see, you go back down to the village and have yourself a happy Christmas. I'll be for thinking of you. And so down the mountain she went. And who should she encounter on the path but an old man dressed in long white robes, carrying a scythe in one hand and an hourglass in the other. Oh dear, it was none other than our Father Death himself. A good day to you, sir, she said. And a good day to you, lassie. Tell me, what would you be doing up here on Christmas Eve? Oh, says Death, I have an appointment up on the mountain later this evening. And on he went slowly up the path. The lass was so upset. She rushed back to her grandfather's house, and she said, "Oh, grandfather, I just met Father Death on the path, and he said he had an appointment on the mountain tonight. And won't you please come down to the village and stay with us? Maybe you can get away from him." Oh, well, if Death is coming for me, you know as well as I that there's no getting away. I've cooked myself a fine meal, and if it's to be my last one, might as well stay here and enjoy it. You go on back to the village and don't you worry about me. So as he went down the mountain, and the old man settled down to his meal. And before long, a great storm did start blowing up there on the mountain. Snow and sleet and towering wind. And then there came a knocking at the door. And the old man went to open it, and sure enough, it was a fellow in a long white robe. And he had a scythe in one hand and an hourglass in the other. And the old man said, "Oh, yes, yes, I've been expecting you. Won't you come in now? Out of the cold, and warm yourself by the fire for a moment." "Oh, yes, this weather is fierce. I'd love to come in," says Death. "I was just having myself a bit of mushroom soup. If you have some time, I wonder if you'd care to join me. Just get out another plate." And Death held up his hourglass and looked at his meat. He said, "Oh, I think there is time, and I must say I am a bit hungry." And after dishing up the stew, the old man remembered a fine old bottle of malt whiskey he'd got tucked away in a closet. So he brought it out and asked if Death would like a wee dram. With that, it would be so nice. And the two of them sat a fine Christmas supper, telling tales back and forth and sipping on the whiskey. And then Death looked at his hourglass again. "Oh, well, time is running out now, and I'd better get on." He got up to go, and the old man got up too, put on his coat. Death said, "Where do you think you're going?" "I thought you said it was time to go." "Oh, no, no, it's not you that I'm so right. Why, there's an old woman up the way, all crippled up with arthritis, she is. She's the one I have written down in my book." "Oh, and I can tell you, she'll be glad to see me too. She has been suffering all these many years. As for you, why, no, no. You have many good years ahead of you. I just did because I knew that I could count on you for a good meal and a warm spot to go in this bad storm. And since you've been so generous and hospitable, I'll tell you this much. You have nothing to fear from me. When your time has come, you'll know to greet me as your friend." And so Death went on his way out the door and up the mountain. And just as he said would happen, the old woman greeted him and went with him gratefully. And the old man put in many more good years and many visits from his granddaughter. And when his time finally did come, he recognized Death as an old friend and had no regrets at all about going with him. All right. This that story was told at the Jonesboro Festival in 1993 by a Scotsman named Stanley Robinson. And it was from the recording that I learned to tell it. This next story is actually by Hans Christian Andersen, but it's not one that we ordinarily find in children's books of his. It was published in a newspaper near Christmas time. He did sell it to make some money from it. It's called The House Elf and the Grocer. There was once a poor, hard-working student who had nothing of his own in this world. He rented an attic room in the house of a grocer. The grocer also worked very hard. His shop was on the ground floor of the house, and he and his family lived in the rest of it, except for that attic room that was the street. There was also a house elf who lived in the grocery shop. Every Christmas Eve, the grocer set out a dish of porridge with a spoonful of jam and a large lump of butter right in the middle. And this was for the house elf. Because the grocer could afford this, the house elf stayed on year after year in the shop. And this tells us something about the house elf. One evening, just before Christmas, the student came down to buy a candle and some cheese, and he paid for his purchases, nodded a good evening to the grocer and his wife, and started back up the stairs. And suddenly he stopped and stood looking at the sheet of paper in which the grocer had wrapped the trees. It was a page torn out of an old book of poetry. "Oh, there's more of that over there," said the grocer. "I gave the old woman some coffee for the book. If you give me 2 pence, you can have the rest." "Oh, yes," said the student. "Give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread without cheese. It would be a shame to have the book torn apart. You are a clever and practical man, sir, but you understand as much about poetry as that old tub over there." Now that sounded rude. The grocer laughed, and so did the student. They knew it was only a joke. But the house elf was angry that anyone dared to say such a thing to the grocer, who owned the whole house and stole the very best liquor. When it was night and the shop was shut, and everyone was in bed except the student, the house elf went upstairs and borrowed the grocer's wife's tongue. She was a great talker. She talked from the time she got up in the morning to the time she went to bed at night. She didn't need the tongue when she was asleep. And downstairs he went with it, and whatever object in the store he put the tongue on, that thing began to speak its thoughts and feelings out loud. First he laid the tongue on the tub in which the old newspapers were kept. "Is it true," he asked, "that you know nothing about poetry?" "Certainly not," answered the tongue. "Poetry is printed in the papers. I have a great deal more poetry in me than that student has, though I am only a small tub in the grocer's shop." The house elf next put the tongue on the coffee mill, and how it became silent. He put it on the butter cask, and on the cash drawer, and many other objects, and all were of the same opinion as the tub. One must respect the majority opinion. We'll go up and tell the student. The house elf went softly up the stairs to the attic, where a light burned in the student's room. The elf peeped through the keyhole and saw the student reading the torn book he had brought in the shop. But how bright the room was! Out of the book rose a beam of light, which grew into a large tree and spread its branches above the student. And every leaf was alive, and every flower a pretty girl's face, every fruit a glittering star. And marvelous music filled the room. The little house elf had never dreamed of such splendor. He stood on tiptoe, gazing and gazing, till the light in the attic went out. The student blew it out and went to bed. But the house elf kept on standing outside, listening to the music, which played on softly and sweetly, singing the student a lullaby. "I have never seen anything like this," said the house elf. "She never expected this. She must move upstairs and live with the student." Then he thought that over, for he was a sensible elf. The student has no jam. So he went down to the grocer's again. And it was a good thing that he did, for the tub had nearly worn out the tongue. It had read everything inside it from top to bottom and was about to start over again, when the house elf came back, rescued the tongue, and returned it to its owner. However, everything in the shop, from the cash drawer down to the shavings on the floor, changed its opinion of the tub from that night on. They looked up to it and had such faith in it that when the grocer read the news and the art and drama critiques and the editorials from the paper in the evenings, they were under the impression that it all came from the tub. But the house elf would no longer sit quietly listening downstairs. As soon as light shone out under the attic door in the evening, it seemed to draw him upward. And he would go to the top of the stairs and peep through the keyhole. He felt there the sort of feeling that we get from looking at grand works of nature. Tears would run down his face. He could not explain why exactly, because he felt quite happy. How beautiful it would be to sit right under the tree with the student. But that he could not do. He had to be content with the keyhole because of the jam. So he stood there on the landing, while the December wind blew through the cracks of the floor. It was cold, very cold. But he noticed that only after the light in the attic went out and the music had died away. Oh, then the wind chilled him, and he crouched back downstairs to his warm corner, where it was comfortable and cozy. And then Christmas came, and with it porridge, with jam and a large lump of butter. Oh, then he was sure that the grocer came first in his heart. But in the middle of the night after Christmas, the house elf awoke to a great noise, shouting and banging on the shutters from outside. The night watchman was blowing his horn. A fire broke out, and the town was in flames. Was it their house? A neighbor's? Where was it? Great commotion broke out, and the grocer's wife was so frightened. She took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket in order to save something. The grocer grabbed his account books, and the maid her black silk dress. Everyone tried to save his most valuable possession. So did the house elf. The student had gone back to his home village for the holiday, and in a few leaps the elf was up the stairs into the student's room. He stood just a moment by the window, looking at the fire burning in the neighbor's house, just opposite. And then he took the book lying on the table and fitted it to his red cap and clasped it onto his head with both hands, knowing that the best treasure in the house was now saved. And he climbed out the window, onto the roof, and up onto the chimney. And there he sat, lit up by the flames, both hands clasped tightly over his red cap, and knew what his heart truly valued the most. But when the fire was out, he crept back through the window and he placed the book back on the table and thought it over yet one more time. I must divide myself between the two, he said at last. I cannot give up the grocer altogether because of the jam. And isn't it often just the same with the rest of us?
Thank you, thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Uh-oh. Not sure we got that one recorded, but. I'm available for 1 minute, so we'll have to wait a minute. Don't know what that's about. It's unhappy with me. I don't know why it cut off. Anyway. I'll try to remember to turn it back on. This one needs to go a little bit higher. Or I won't have a hit, which may be the case anyway. It'll be 1 minute. Wait him out for a minute. Consider copy. So it will be recorded. I want to tell you a story from a long time ago. But I'm gonna wait 30 more seconds.
It's gonna be even over.
There we go. There we go. Here we go. Here. I don't know why it cut off before, but it did. It's hot out today, isn't it? Yeah, it always is. Yeah, can you hand me that stone over there? I think it will go best here. Okay, thank you. Oh, right there. Yeah. She'll say this a while. You're new here, yeah? Yeah. You know, you want to know if we can take a break? Well, see over there. The Roman soldiers come by on their patrol. I think we better wait a while. They don't take kindly on their workers not working. But if you look down that way, down at the end of the walk, there's shade down there. If we keep working, maybe by the hottest time of the day, we'll be down there in the shade. Yeah, yeah. I've been doing this a long time. Yeah, right here. Well, thank you, thank you. It is good to have more than one trade, to be able to be a builder and work mainly with stone, because look around you, that's all there is here. But also, yeah, to have those carpenter skills that I have, to be able to work some with wood too. That's been good. Yeah, I've been coming here a long time, coming up over the ridge every morning, or sometimes I'll come up here and stay for a week and then go back down to the little town at the bottom of the hill. Long time, long time. What? How long have I lived in Nazareth? You know, the little town. Well, it's a long story. It's a long story. Have you ever been there? No? Well, it's just a little village. Like I said, you go up over the ridge and down the valley to this small little town. Little village, really. Good people there. Good, faithful people. Yeah, my family was from there. My family came from down in Judah. Little village called Bethlehem. Yeah, yeah. Everybody down there is related to King David, including me. You know, there are people who are devout in Nazareth, and they're related to some of the priestly families. But we were real simple folks. Our homes are mainly built into the hillside, cave-like kind of things, and there's a well, and of course there's a place to worship. And when I come up to work here for a week, I try to make it back before the Sabbath to worship with the community. No, the Romans don't like it. Of course they don't. We're their slaves, we're their labor. But this was much better when I was a younger man, getting older. When I was a younger man, to be able to come here and work than to be conscripted into the army. It's glad to have a skill. And you know, I can make a little bit extra so that the taxes that the Romans put on us don't take everything. Oh, you still want to know how I got to Nazareth? Well, how I got here. Well, how far back do I go? Well, it was years ago, and I was coming up, working up here in the daytime and going back at night. I was still a young man and could do the journey every day. Although sometimes I came and stayed for a week, and but I realized I was getting older and I hadn't found a wife yet. And that's pretty important, as you know. When I was walking back down the hill for the Sabbath and crossing the field, and I looked out, and there was a young woman out in the field harvesting the grain with her friends and her neighbors. She wasn't anything special to look at, but there was something about her. I sort of thought, I wonder if she's a lot younger than I am. I wondered if she would make a good wife. So I started running into her on purpose. If she came back from the well, or she delivered cheese to a neighbor, or all the everyday chores, and I had some conversations with her. And eventually I went to her father and asked for her hand in marriage, and he said yes. He knew that I was as poor as they were, except maybe I had a little more set aside because I'd been working up at the Roman city. And so we were betrothed, we were engaged, that formal document that says that we were going to become married. And this engagement lasted for about a year. Things were going fine. I'm still spending most of my time up here building. Can you hand me that rock? Yeah, that would work just right over here. Thank you. Yeah, wedge it in. Yeah. So we were engaged. And I would go back and I would see her, and normal kind of conversation, normal little contract. And then one day I was coming back down the hill, and she was sitting over in a tree on the roadway, and she called me over. She said, I have something to tell you. Okay. She usually was very quiet and didn't say a whole lot, but she had something to tell me. She said, last night, no, yesterday afternoon, when I was out in the field by myself, this, I can only describe it as a messenger showed up. He was sort of fearful. And he said, "You are favored." And I thought, what? And he said to her, "You are favored. You are blessed among all women. You found favor with God." And he was trying to figure out what that meant. But he said, "You're going to have a child. And you're going to name that child Jesus, which means Savior, the one who will save the people." And she said, I was trying to take that in. And the only thing I could think of, she was very practical, was I've never been with a man before. How can I have a child? We've been faithful in our engagement. Yeah, roll your eyes, but we had been. And this messenger told her she was going to have a child on college. And she didn't know what that meant. And this child was going to make a huge difference in the whole nation, everybody, all people. And she was still sort of in awe and afraid and upset. And she said, "Okay, it will be as you said." Then she said this messenger disappeared. And I'm sitting there going, what in the world? Who have I taken as my betrothed? She has this story about messengers from God. And it told me one of leaving messengers from God. And then she told me she was going to have a child, that she was pregnant. Well, I was angry was my first response. I was really angry. Here I'd been faithful for all this time, and she was undercut. She was betrothed to me. She was engaged to me. What was she thinking? And then a part of me was sort of afraid for her and what would happen to my reputation and her reputation. And I took off. I guess she went back into the village. And I was trying to figure out what to do. And it occurred to me I could just have the contract annulled, the engagement annulled, just forget about it, let it go, and she would deal with it with her family. It wouldn't be the first time it happened, and hopefully nobody would take it out on her. And I went to sleep that night. Have you ever had a dream that was so real that you thought it was real? It was more real than reality? That's what happened to me that night. I was sound asleep, and all of a sudden, it was like I was awake again. And there was, I can only describe it, this messenger from God, and said to me, "Take Mary as your wife and name the baby Jesus, Savior, the one who will save us." And I was going, wait, what? You want me to risk all of that, to go ahead and marry her? And I knew when I woke up the next morning, that's what I was going to do. So I went to Mary and told her, I went to her father and said, I'm going to marry her. We're going to continue with this engagement. I suspect he was relieved. I wasn't sure about raising this child as my own, especially all this stuff about Holy Spirit. I didn't know what to do with that. And yeah, I took some ribbing. I imagine you've given people a hard time about stuff like that too, right? Yeah. But it was okay. I continued to come up here and work, probably spent more time up here than down in Nazareth in that time. And Mary, she disappeared for a while. She went to see her cousin Elizabeth, who was an old woman who was having a baby. And when Mary got back, she told me, she said that the baby that this old woman was having had kicked when she showed up, and that she knew at that point that everything that this messenger had told her, that her child was going to cause a huge upset in the way the world worked, was going to do something, save the people, those of us who are so oppressed, acting, being as slaves, the Romans maybe, but definitely going to turn things upside down. Definitely would be Jesus, Savior, God's Savior. Well, she was there with Elizabeth for 3 months, and she came back, and by then she was starting to show a little bit. That's when all the the ribbing happened, and all the people gave us a hard time. Then she got bigger and bigger, and getting to the point where she was going to have the child anytime now. And I came home that evening before the Sabbath and heard the horses coming into town. It was the Roman soldiers, yeah, like those guys. They didn't have far to come in Bethlehem, because back up behind the village was this huge mound that Herod was building as his place of burial. You couldn't look out from the village without seeing Herod's presence. And here were the soldiers in town, all their little footmen, the captain on a horse, the footmen banging on the doors, calling us to come out. We all came out and stood around the well. And he said, "We have a proclamation from the emperor. Every single one of you needs to go to your home of origin, to your family's home of origin. The emperor needs to make sure that everybody's paying their taxes. And we're not sure, with everybody moving around, that we've got hold of who's paid and who hasn't. Like they haven't taken everything we have away." Yeah, I need to be quiet when I'm talking about that. Yeah. Yeah. And so some of the soldiers stayed, and the rest of us, a lot of people in Nazareth were from Nazareth, they weren't going anywhere. And I had come from Judah, from that town, Bethlehem, and I knew I was going to have to go there. And they weren't giving us any time to get ready. And here was Mary, I don't know, too long, sometime before too long. Somebody lent us a donkey thinking she could ride it. Yeah, she wasn't going to sit on a donkey in her state. But we used it as a pack animal, and I put some of my tools, and we grabbed some bread and cheese and blankets and took off down through the mountains where there were thieves and robbers and animals toward Jerusalem. It would take us at least a week, especially with Mary in her state. Fortunately, other people were going too. So we gathered with a group and we started on our way. One foot in front of the other. Mary couldn't see her feet, so I had to walk her over the rocks and over the pieces of roots and stuff, and she had to sleep on the ground. We had a fire at night. We took turns as a group, setting up to keep watch. If we heard a sound, we'd wake up the other men, and we would stand guard to make sure it wasn't a thief or some kind of animal. We made it up through the hills and down towards the valley. I still remember her face when we came around the corner, and there was Jerusalem. There was the temple, shining in the sun. She'd never been to any place that big before, and she just stopped in awe. But there were lots and lots of people flowing into Jerusalem all around us, and we had to keep moving. We went down the hill, across the valley, up through the city gates. She was looking everywhere, although she was really tired. Looking everywhere, trying to see all the sights. We went on through Jerusalem, didn't want to stay there. Came out of Jerusalem and made it back down the hillside and along the ridges. And finally we came to my hometown, to Bethlehem. Yeah, a lot like Nazareth. Same kind of deal. People's houses into the sides of the hills, into the kind of places. Yeah, same kind of house. You probably live there. Sort of one room, place for a little fire pit and place to sleep, and maybe a little partition off to one side where my parents would stay, unless there was a guest. The guest always got that place. And yeah, we had that step down to one side where it was all dirt, but step down to the place where the animals stayed. And the feeding trough there, and some of their fodder, we bring them in at night, nothing but chickens and few sheep and course, our donkey we had now, the borrowed donkey that ended up in ours. And there we were. My parents came out to greet us. I looked at Mary and she looked, especially the women in the household. She was expecting her mom to help her deliver this child, and the people she knew, the midwife from Nazareth, and here she was with these strange women, this strange place. I felt for her in that time. And of course, we didn't get the guest room because everybody had come for the census thing. It was already full of relatives. But there was room there where the animals stayed. That step down with a feeding trough and the animals. And really, if you're going to have a child, it's a messy thing. Being among the strong, that's probably the best place. And we were exhausted that night, went to sleep, and it was several days later when Mary's time came. Now, you know, and I know that we men aren't always so helpful when our wives have children, but you know, it's a small house in a small community, and you couldn't avoid it altogether. I was there in the room up above, and she and the other women in the household were helping her deliver this child. And then I knew it was really time, and I stepped down into the central area where she was on the clean straw, and there was the child. And my heart went out to it. It was like it was my child. I knew it wasn't, but it was like it was my child. And I loved that child in that minute. It was my son Jesus. And yeah, there were people in that household, and as well as Mary's, wondered why on earth we picked that name. It wasn't a family name. Savior? This little baby. Well, she was exhausted, and I wrapped the baby up, and I made a place cleaned out the feeding trough and filled it with fodder. Put the child in there while she rested. And it was night, and we fell asleep. We're trying to keep watch, but no, we were both exhausted. And then I heard a sound. And there was an opening where the animals would come in and out, and well, I could smell them before I could see them. There were some men who were obviously shepherds. They reeked of sheep, and they were coming in. And I woke up, and Mary was stirring, and the people in the house in the room up above were starting to stir too. And they came in, and they knelt down. I wonder where the baby was. And I thought, in the world, what are they doing? They said they'd been out in the field that night, you know, taking care of the sheep. When this messenger showed up, and they weren't sure. The messenger said, great news for you, wonderful, incredible news for you and for all people. The one you've been waiting for, the Savior, has been born. He's the Messiah. And the shepherds said, we were going, what? And then the messenger said, go to Bethlehem and find a baby who's just been born, who's lying in a feeding trough. That'll be a sign to you that what we said is true. And then the shepherd said, you know, we'd already lost part of the sheep when this messenger showed up. And all of a sudden there was just like this heavenly army right in front of us, and they was praising God, talking about this good news for everybody. Oh, fevers. At that point, the sheep were all gone, stinking away, terrified. And the shepherds turned to each other and they said, well, we decided we'd come see if we could find this. So they'd come into Bethlehem, they started knocking on doors, asking questions. Finally, a neighbor said, we heard a woman in labor right down there. And here we are. And we had to tell you this story. This is the one that these messengers from God told us about. Well, they left singing and excited, and Mary and I looked at each other, and other people in the house looked at each other, and we all remembered what happened. And after that, you know, it was a week of very little sleep. Is anybody with a new child not, well, you're not old enough to know that yet. There's the place for that wrong. Yeah. And then it was time for the baby to be dedicated, and we went all the way back up into Jerusalem to the temple. I didn't have anything but a bunch of two pigeons for the offering, but we went in, and there was a man, I think he said his name was Simeon, and he took his zipper and said, "You can wait, you can die in peace now, because I have seen salvation of our people." What? Here it is again. And there was an older woman there. She must have been in her 80s, and she lived in the temple and took care of things, one of those widows, and she was telling everybody about the redemption of our people. Well, we remembered that too. We went back home and life became normal. Baby grew. Baby needed to be cleaned. Baby needed to be fed. Baby learned how to walk. We got a little house. And here we were. Things were going fine. One morning, Mary was out making the bread. I was carrying tools to go help somebody put up the gate. And there was sort of a disturbance down the road. It was like there was something coming, some people coming in. Strangers is what the word was. And we looked up, and there was a whole group of people coming. They had strange animals, and they were wearing, well, their clothes were all dusty and tattered like they traveled a long way, but they were fine material and fine colors. And they stopped in front of our house. And we invited them in, and they knelt in front of our toddler, Jesus. The one of them went back and got a big bundle and put it down, and there in the bundle, I opened it up, I could see it before I could see it. There was some kind of incense. It smelled very expensive. And there was another bundle, that's myrrh that they used for burials and spice. And then there was a pouch, and you opened it up, and it was full of gold. I'd never seen gold like that before. I've never seen gold, hardly at all. And they told us they had seen a special sign in the heavens that led us to our child. Oh. Well, they left. And I bundled the stuff back up and hid. And that night it was hard to go to sleep. We went to sleep remembering all those messages before, and maybe it was thinking about those messages, but there was another dream. This one wasn't as good. It was, you need to get out of here. Herod, whose shadow was over our village all the time, Herod is going to try and kill your son. No. Take Mary, take the child, and go to Egypt. What? Well, didn't waste any time. We got our own donkey by this point of time, and put a few of my tools and cheese and bread and robes and blankets, and took off along the edge of the desert in the darkness down toward Egypt. We stayed there for several years. And with the Hebrew community, yeah, Jesus probably grew up speaking our language and making well attention and probably some Greek. He was a smart child. When life was good, I had plenty of work to do. We were away from Herod, not quite away from all the Romans. We had Egyptians, but I was okay. And then came that other dream. Herod's gone. We began to hear that Herod had died, but the dream said, Herod's gone. You can go back. Go back. So we packed up, not quite as fast this time. Headed up toward Bethlehem. We got near, and I could still see that place, that big mound where Herod was buried and the soldiers were, and thought, nah, can't do that. His son is now in power. Let's go back to Mary's home. Let's go back to Nazareth. And that's what we did. Yeah, we had more children, still having more children. And yes, I started back in the routine of coming back over the ridge to work up here to build the city. And going back, probably more often now. Going back especially for Sabbath. Raising our children, telling the stories. Mary's told them the stories as a child, and going to school, and they're learning all the stories about God. And you know what? Jesus is turning 12 in a few months. And we're going to take him to Jerusalem. We're going to take him to the temple when he becomes a man. Yeah, leave the brothers and sisters here. We're going to take him to Jerusalem. Yeah, it is getting almost dark. We need to make it back down the hill. That was more story than you probably wanted. That's the story of how Joseph came to Nazareth. Hope to see you tomorrow.